The Last of Us has finally dropped after years of development, and we thought it would be a nice change here at the channel to start covering this series, starting with one of the largest parts of the lore, the monsters. The infected within the world of The Last of Us have many different subtypes, and they're all pretty much terrifying, hellish nightmares come to life. And today's video is all about these horrendous creatures. We're going to cover the background of what exactly they are, how they're formed, how they hunt and interact, the different types of them, some random lore from the games, and even how they fall in love. Okay, not that last one, but, quick, a history lesson. The Last of Us is a new HBO television series based off the award-winning video game series of the same name, and if the show is half as good as the games, it's poised to be one of the largest and most talked about shows in HBO history. With a budget reportedly larger than even Game of Thrones and an award-winning writing team and cast, this show is simply built different. If this was stock, it would absolutely be blue chip. Invest. Now, back to the infected. The world of The Last of Us is predicated by an event. In the year 2003, a mutant outbreak of a cordyceps fungus breaks out across the globe. The events of the show follow the world many years later. In the game, it's about 23 years after Patient Zero began infecting others. In the show, it's exactly 20 years. Nick, you're a fun guy. Why don't you explain to us exactly what is a cordyceps fungus? Sorry, I'm reading my own script back and these jokes suck, but I'm going to do a comedy workshop or something as my 2023 New Year's resolution. A cordyceps fungus is a type of fungi that is parasitic in nature, meaning it lives in close association with a host and at the host's expense, usually resulting in the host's death. Now, there are hundreds of different types of this fungus, but typically they only affect insects and plants. Within the world of The Last of Us, a mutated strain of the fungus breaks out and works its way into crops. Human beings then eat the crops and become infected with the spores of the fungus. From there, the fungus slowly begins to destroy the neurological functioning of the brain as the fungus takes over the body. Slowly but surely, the human being is no more, and all that's left is a walking, clicking, fungus-controlled stalking death mushroom person. While fungus may not typically terrify you, anybody who's either experienced Athlete's Foot or played the Last of Us series will realize that these are some of the scariest creatures in fiction, period. The country and the planet spin into absolute chaos. The cordyceps fungus not only transforms human beings into these essentially brainless monsters controlled by a fungus, but the cordyceps also instills an instinct within the new being to hunt and kill basically any human it can. After all, the fungus is a living being who on a primal nature wants to continue to exist and repopulate. In 2013, GamesBeat did an interview with the game's creative director Neil Druckmann where they mentioned the concept of the clicker, the infected, and the mutated cordyceps fungus, and they were a byproduct of a nature documentary Planet Earth from 2006. Druckmann and director Bruce Staley mentioned watching the series and noticing how ants became essentially zombies from a fungus taking over their bodies. From there, the two adapted the concept to human beings and thought it was particularly interesting how beautiful the fungus was as it infects every pore of the host creature, eventually killing them and taking them over. There are multiple ways to become infected by the cordyceps fungus. The first way you can become infected is either by ingesting or breathing the fungus in, primarily through the spores of the fungus that show up near places where infectant are present or make their dens. The original outbreak was caused by contaminated crops and ingestion. However, as the infected grew, so did the spore population, which became the second most plentiful way of becoming infected. Usually, if you're around one, if you have any hopes of surviving, you need to wear a gas mask. The last and by far most miserable way of becoming infected is coming into contact with the bodily fluids of an infected person, whether that is by being bitten by someone who is infected, scratched, or, they spit in your face or something. Regardless, this concept is carried over from basically every zombie film, game, or show. It's just kind of par for the course. When bitten or infected by the fungus, you don't automatically become this monstrous beast. The process takes time as the fungus grows within the brain and affects every major organ. First, you develop a fever, then you begin to lose motor function, and eventually, you are no longer you are now the Mushroom Man. Next up, let's discuss loosely the different types of infected there are, as not every fungi is created equal. Depending upon how interested everyone is in the content we're making here, we may make a more detailed video breakdown pending, how many different types of infected we see in the first season. The first stage of infection is referred to as runners. They resemble your typical zombie, as the mycelium forms in the brain and the human body slowly dies. This occurs within roughly 2 days of first exposure. Runners become incredibly aggressive, and they basically run towards the nearest living thing and try to kill it. Their vision is poor, but they're fast, and they tend to exist in packs, and oftentimes within the games and even in the show, as you've seen, they can overwhelm you simply by having 5 of them in the same place at once. The worst part of this stage is that it's believed that, to some extent, the person the fungus has taken over is still alive in there, even though their motor functions are controlled by something else. The next phase of infection are referred to as stalkers, and this process usually takes anywhere between 2 weeks and a full year to achieve. These creepy buggers usually like to camp out inside poorly lit buildings, as the infection within their brain usually bursts out of their skulls and eye sockets. Stalkers have vision, but it's extremely limited, so they hunt within confined spaces using their superior stealth and agility. They kind of pop out and try to snack on you. Stage 3, though, is probably the most notable form that an infected takes, referred to as the clicker. This stage takes about a year to form. They appear less human than runners or stalkers, usually with a giant crown of fungus rupturing from their heads and various parts of their body. Clickers are completely blind, but they hunt their prey using echolocation similar to bats. They use various vocal clicks to pinpoint prey and hunt it, hence the name clickers. They have phenomenal hearing, so in order to escape them, you either need to misdirect them using noise or move so incredibly softly that they can't hear your movements. They are fast and far stronger than the average human being. If startled or hunting, a clicker will flail their entire body around like my wife if a spider is within 10 feet. The last stage of infection is referred to as a bloater. This takes an unspecified amount of time, usually years, to achieve, and the exact conditions that caused one to form aren't really known. They are massive, incredibly powerful, durable, and they have thick armor-like plating on their body made of fungus. They also use echolocation, but they are far less effective at it due to the thicker fungus covering their heads. Bloaters can also throw sacks of myotoxin that explodes, spewing poisonous mist. There is a subspecies of bloater that can occur if the infected is around massive amounts of water, called a shambler. A shambler is effectively the same thing as a bloater, but instead of poisonous sacks of mist, they fire acid off of their bodies as a defense mechanism and a kill tactic. The environment that the infected lives in after exposure determines not only how quickly the fungus advances throughout the stages, but ultimately what final form the victim will become. A lot of this information isn't directly known to the people of the world, as heavy documentation is hard. It requires a lot of recon, which puts people into very serious danger. Now, the last thing I could think of is, Nick, you might be thinking to yourself, if the infection needs time to grow, what's stopping you from amputating a limb to save the entire host? Well, first off, that's disgusting. I can't believe you thought of that, but it is a good question, and that option is entirely in play. There is evidence in the DLC that at least one soldier tried saving another's life by amputating their arm. You later find the body of a soldier with an amputated arm in an air vent, but there's simply too many questions to determine whether or not that's evidence enough that this was able to save his life. Like, we don't know how much time had passed. And that is everything I wanted to cover for the infection present within the world of The Last of Us. I hope you enjoy this miserable journey into hell that we're all about to experience, but trust me when I say that there is light at the end of the tunnel. While the world may be bleak and brutal, this series shines a light on what it means to be human when humanity is stripped away. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you found it informative, and if you do, feel free to give it a like and subscribe. This has been Nick from Key Issues. Thanks again for watching, and remember the motto, The Last of Us over everything.